Hello, Tarot friends. Up today is top 10 Tarot decks for shadow work. If you're feeling stuck, looping repetitive patterns, or doubting your own perceptions after dealing with manipulation or gaslighting from a narcissistic person or even mass media, or maybe you want to explore the shadow side of sexuality, gender, and the Jungian archetypes of animus and anima. Tarot is a powerful tool that can help you reconnect with your higher self and your authentic expression. In this video, I'll recommend 10 decks for shadow work and share how they can support your personal reading style. So whether you're unpacking how past trauma continues to affect you, or confronting inner demons, or exploring Jungian animus and anima, or maybe you just need to find some clarity after being gaslit, this video will offer great options for both modern Rider-Waite Smith style decks and also historic Marseille and Tarocchi style pip decks, depending on your personal reading style. We'll also cover decks for beginners, decks for advanced readers, and decks that support reading with numerology. The video is organized into 10 prompts for different types of decks and different shadow work scenarios. Timestamps are in the description if you like to skip ahead. If you're new here, welcome to Anastasia Tarot and Vedic Astrology, where we sail the cosmic currents, searching for the treasure of divine wisdom, one tarot card at a time. So now let's get into the first prompt if you only have one deck. As always, the different decks and different topics are time-stamped as chapters in the description, so you can skip ahead at any time during this video. So the first scenario for shadow work reading is when you've only got one deck. I've chosen Rider-Waite Smith and Thoth for this topic because many of us started our practice with either a Rider-Waite Smith or a Thoth deck. These decks are both classics, they're widely available, and as I said, many of us started with one or the other of these decks. For this particular video, the Rider-Waite Smith I'm using is Pam's Vintage Tarot, and I believe it was from MakePlayingCards.com, one of those print-on-demand services. It's an indie deck, but I do believe it's still pretty easy to get a hold of on MakePlayingCards.com. So how to use Rider-Waite Smith for shadow work? And I will say there is a reason that this deck is the most popular deck in the world. And that is because it can really handle anything you throw at it. This deck is very balanced. It has a mixture of benefic and malefic imagery. It has both light and dark imagery. And it's just incredibly versatile. It can read on any topic, including shadow work. And so if you've only got one deck and it happens to be a Rider-Waite Smith, this deck will absolutely support any shadow work type of topic that you can throw at it. It's a great deck. So the other deck that is very widely available and a deck that many people get started with is this Thoth deck. Thoth absolutely excels at shadow work. It's kind of a hybrid pip deck. The pips are not fully illustrated, but they're definitely more illustrated than a Marseille style or a Tarocchi style deck. And as you can see, the pip cards are extremely evocative, and some of the artwork on the majors is amazing. This is a deep deck. Thoth was created by Aleister Crowley and Lady Frida Harris with a great deal of occult symbolism woven into the illustrations. It is absolutely able to handle really deep topics and complex topics. The artwork is evocative on so many layers and levels. So again, if you've only got one deck, and you may have Thoth just lying around, or if you've only got one deck because this is the deck you started with, Thoth is absolutely a wonderful, wonderful deck to use for shadow work. So for the dark topic, when you suspect you're being manipulated or you feel yourself doubting your own reality and your own perceptions, Mystical Tarot by Lo Scarabeo. This is a mass market release. It's budget friendly, it's widely available, and this deck excels when it comes to questions about what is real. We'll get into that in just a moment. Historically speaking, this deck is very interesting. Even though it's a modern deck, Mystical Tarot reminds me of what would happen if Rider-Waite Smith and Solavuska got married. Mystical Tarot would be their baby. So Solavuska is this historic Italian deck from the 1490s that influenced Pamela Coleman Smith when she created the Rider-Waite Smith deck. So Mystical Tarot, in a way, is like coming home. This deck is blending imagery, like you can see here. This really evokes the imagery of the Solavuska Three of Swords, but it's built on a Rider-Waite Smith platform. Solavuska is extremely difficult to read with. But this deck being built on a Rider-Waite Smith platform, it is easy to read for those of us trained in Rider-Waite Smith. And some of this imagery, I definitely use this deck if I'm reading about UFOs, topics like that. This deck, I love this devil, and this devil is evocative of medieval and Renaissance depictions of the devil. So this deck, although it's modern, it is connecting us to the roots of Tarocchi back in Renaissance Italy. And again, some of the imagery on this deck is just, it's great if you like to read on UFO sightings or things like that. And it has a sort of transcendent quality too. When you're reading on dark topics, this kind of transcendent quality and surrealistic quality. Also, if you're dealing with, a narcissist or a manipulative person who's causing you to question your own reality, this surrealistic feeling with this deck really supports what happens with me emotionally anyway. And I recently used this deck to read on the question, is this person a grifter? I was involved with a situation, and one person really started to seem like they might be a grifter. And this deck just gave me a straight up answer, which was, sadly, the person I suspected of being a grifter was not. And it was the person that I trusted in the situation that was actually responsible for the manipulative and dishonest communication. So I was very sad, of course, to get that message, which was basically, you know, a person I thought was a friend was not to be trusted. But I very much felt grateful for this deck. Just, it gave it to me straight. You know, the person you think is a grifter, don't worry about that person. It's, you know, this other one. So, mystical tarot, if you're questioning reality, you're feeling like you're being gaslit, whether that's from media coverage. For example, I used this deck to read on some of the Luigi Mangione news. So again, whether it's reading on mass media, news, UFOs, crimes, things of that nature, or whether you're reading on a more personal nature because you feel like someone may be gaslighting you or manipulating you. This mystical tarot by Lo Scarabeo absolutely excels in those type of topics. So next up in the topic of Rider-Waite-Smith style decks for shadow work is Triunfi della Luna Illustrated Pips Edition. So this deck is created by Patrick Valenza of Deviant Moon, and it's not mass market, it's an indie release. However, I believe you can get it either on Etsy or on the Deviant Moon Patrick Valenza website. It should be, you know, still pretty easily available. This deck excels for shadow work when you're going into the dark side of your own emotions. This is a very emotional deck. Astrologically speaking, the name is Triunfi della Luna, Triumph of the Moon, and there is quite a bit of lunar imagery in this deck. And of course, the moon rules emotions and the emotional mind. The imagery is beautiful in a very dark way. But it just very much speaks to me when I'm dealing with my inner demons. You know, the demonic imagery may not be everyone's cup of tea with this deck, but I have inner demons, and this artwork on this deck really touches me deeply. And this is the devil that I use when I'm reading. As you can see, she's really quite an interesting devil. This deck comes with an expansion pack of extra devils. So this deck has something like 7 different devil cards, and there are various styles of devil. So you can pick your devil. This one also I really like, if, you know, he's a pretty hardcore devil. So with these extra devil cards, this deck is just made for doing shadow work, what can I say? And it has, you know, the demonic imagery. It also has a couple of different options for the tower or the lightning. The one that I use is the Hand of God. This star card is amazing. It's painful even to, sometimes I look at this card and I just start crying. But for those of us that have, you know, pieces missing along the way, if life has not necessarily been kind and there are pieces missing, that card really evokes this. And it's really just a beautiful deck. And in spite of all the demonic imagery, here's the star card that I use. You can see it depicts an astrologer. And because I'm an astrologer, I love this card. It also evokes some of these earlier historic decks where the star was shown as an astrologer. This deck, even with all the demonic imagery and the dark imagery, it's actually a very kind deck. I strangely, after reading with this deck, especially on really painful, deep emotional topics, I feel uplifted and integrated. This deck does have a wonderful ability to support the integration process with our shadow side. So for a Rider-Waite-Smith style deck that supports deeply, deeply emotional work and integrating your dark side, Triunfi della Luna Illustrated Pips Edition by Patrick Valenza and Deviant Moon. So the next scenario is a double header. This is the recommendation for Lightseers Tarot number 1, if you are a reader of any level and you need a more uplifting deck, or 2, if you are a beginner. So I'll get into each of these. First of all, it may sound funny to recommend the Lightseers Tarot for shadow work, but I don't know about you, there are times that my own mind and emotions get so dark and twisted and convoluted and tied up. I don't need a tarot deck to emphasize that. If I am really trapped in my own inner darkness and my thoughts are really twisted and dark, then there are times when I need a lighter, gentler deck to lift me out of that kind of dark and twisted consciousness. And this deck is not a fluffy bunny deck by any means. It definitely has a balance of light and dark. However, if you're in a really dark and twisted kind of a place, the imagery in this deck is wholesome and uplifting. So it's not fluffy bunny, it's not fake positive. It does have some dark imagery, but it's still uplifting. And it will help you start to bring some light into your darkness and some clarity. So I very much, when I need a little bit of light brought into my darkness, I reach for this Lightseers Tarot. Now, why do I recommend this one for beginners? I mean, obviously, if you're beginning with shadow work, you may not want to start with a really dark and heavy deck, of course, but I recommend this Lightseers for beginners if you're just getting started doing shadow work with the tarot, because of the guidebook. Now, many decks come with, pretty stupid guidebooks, let's just be real, but this guidebook is great. And every card is listed as light seer and shadow seer. So if you're a tarot beginner, you can literally do your shadow spread and look up the shadow seer meanings right here in the guidebook. It's absolutely written to make that easy and accessible for beginners. Now, in her instructions, she's giving the shadow seer as being for reading reversals. When I'm doing shadow readings, I tend to read with all upright because, as I said, my thoughts can already be dark and complex enough. I don't need reversals. So it doesn't matter. You can read all uprights and still read these shadow seer interpretations in the guidebook. So for beginners, or if you need something uplifting because you already have enough darkness and complexity in your own mind, the Lightseers Tarot by Chris Ann is a widely available mass market deck with a great guidebook that will support your shadow reading when you need the support of something more wholesome. So wrapping up our exploration of Rider-Waite-Smith style decks is this Fyodor Pavlov Tarot. And if you are exploring the shadow side of sexuality, gender, male-female polarity, animus and anima from a Jungian perspective. This Fyodor Pavlov Tarot excels for this. This deck, I don't necessarily recommend it for beginners. It's not very budget friendly, even though this is the US Games release. It's still quite expensive, and although I adore the deck, I cannot say that I like the guidebook that goes with it. So this to me is a deck if you don't need the guidebook because you're already pretty familiar with the cards. However, I bought the whole deck just for this Lovers card because the gender bending imagery here, the way it's expressing animus and anima and gender polarity is just deeply moving to me. And this deck is a balanced deck. It has some really dark imagery. It has neutral imagery. It has light imagery. It has a very muted color scheme. So, you know, that may or may not be your cup of tea with this very simple and muted color scheme. It's pretty easy to read because it's based on the Rider-Waite-Smith format. And with all the gender bending imagery and just the illustrative style and the simple color scheme, I love this deck for exploring the issues of gender polarity, sexuality, you know, the shadow issues of our own sexuality. It's absolutely a wonderful deck that excels for exploring the shadow side of your sex and gender. So for exploring the shadow side of animus and anima, the shadow side of sexuality and gender, and the inner alchemy of integrating the male and female polarity within our souls, this Fyodor Pavlov Tarot excels for this type of shadow topic. Now we're getting into recommendations for shadow reading with Marseille or Tarocchi style pip decks. Although many people are used to reading with Rider-Waite-Smith decks, I know a lot of you out there read with Tarot de Marseille or Tarocchi style. And if I'm doing shadow work and I want a Tarot de Marseille, this Inversion Tarot by US Games is my go-to deck for that. It is, you know, mass market US game. It's in a tin, and you know I love tarot in a tin. So that alone right there to me makes it a great deck that it comes in this tin. And for shadow work, I mean, it's the Inversion Tarot. It's like literally made for shadow work. It's pretty standard Tarot de Marseille type of imagery, as you can see with the major arcana here. You know, nothing too shocking or different from the regular Tarot de Marseille, except that it's inverted into this black and white, or really more like black and cream color scheme. And although it stays true to the traditional Tarot de Marseille imagery, it is somewhat updated. It has a very clean, kind of minimalist look to it. And this monochromatic color scheme just really works. The inversion is kind of a no-brainer for doing shadow work. Now, when I'm reading with Tarot de Marseille, especially if I'm into a more complex, deep topic like shadow work, I would tend to read with the majors only. But here I'll show you some of the minors are very plain. The pip cards are very plain. The courts are, you know, standard Tarot de Marseille, but again, kind of cleaned up with a minimalist style. And the pips very much have a minimalist style. So when I'm using this deck, I would tend to read with the majors only with this deck. And the only other thing I will say about this deck is I find that it doesn't work for regular readings for me. It's kind of only works for shadow readings or darker topics for me. There's something about this inverted color scheme and this, monochromatic black and cream color scheme that it just naturally puts my mind toward the shadow side of things. So that's the only thing I'll say about my experience with this deck. It's a great deck, but I do find it limited to only reading on shadow topics or dark topics. I personally don't use it for general topics at all. I only use it for pretty specialized topics. So that is the Inversion Tarot. When you want a Tarot de Marseille style pip deck, maybe you like to read with numerology style, or maybe you like to read with majors only in this traditional Tarot de Marseille tradition, but you want something that's going to evoke that shadowy quality to support your shadow work. Inversion Tarot in a tin by US Games. So next up for shadow work with Marseille or Tarocchi style pip decks is Keymaster Tarot, and this is by AGM, so it's a little bit more available in Europe than the United States. It's AGM Urania, and I believe I got this one on eBay. So I do think it's still, pretty widely available, definitely in Europe. But I also, in the United States, I believe you can get it on eBay and various other places, even little stores like Tarot Arts. So this deck, if you do shadow work with animal imagery, or if you're a science fiction fan, that may sound kind of strange, but bear with me. So again, I often do shadow work with only the majors when I'm using a pip deck, but you can see with the Hanged Man, there's this sort of shadowy cat figure in the card. And with the Sun, there are these horses here. And the Fool, of course, has his dog. I love this deck. It has kind of a modernistic science fiction kind of a feel to it. The characters almost remind me of the book Dune somehow. But so for example, Strength here, it's the woman with the cat. But the animals all have a sort of shadowy quality to them. Here we have the Chariot with these sort of gargoyles pulling his chariot. And the Empress, there's a snake here. So I love this with for example, the Lover's card. Here's this little bird. Every one of the majors, or maybe not everyone, but many of the majors have these little animal images kind of hidden within the card itself. And then the other thing is, if you like this sort of geometric graphic design that's somewhat science fiction, here we see the Emperor. There's looks like a white crow there. I just really enjoy this deck. I love the imagery for it. It's a balanced deck. It's neither light nor dark. So again, if you just want a deck that's kind of neutral for your shadow work, because maybe your mind is already dark enough and you don't need extra help from the cards. This is just a very neutral deck. It's not going to weigh in as dark or light. And you can see here with the moon, these dogs have almost this mechanical imagery to them. So this is also from a beautiful star card. So this is also, if you enjoy science fiction, futurism, that type of thing, I find this deck evokes that. Now, This deck also has a playing cards version of it. So the court cards are the same as the Keymaster, regular card deck. And this is the pips in this deck are a hybrid. So we see here the playing card, 5 of Cups, and then we also see in faint, I don't know if it shows up in the card or not, but we can see these faint batons are imposed on the wands. And same thing in the spades, the spade, we have the swords, the old school Tarocchi style swords are imposed. So this is a hybrid deck, which is somewhere between a Marseille or Tarocchi style and a playing card deck. I quite like the court cards. They don't really have what I would call tarot symbolism in them. I just artistically like them. So anyway, this Keymaster Tarot, if you enjoy these animal imagery in it, and if you just want a really neutral pip deck that's going to give you a very straight, no-nonsense answer to your question. This deck will go deep, but it's very graphic and geometric. So it goes deep on those levels. It's not relying on a bunch of occult symbolism per se. And as I said, this deck excels if you like reading with the majors only, because as you can see, the majors all have this gold border, whereas the pips have a black border. So it's very easy to pick the majors out of the deck. If you want to do a majors only reading, I recommend Keymaster Tarot. Next up is a Tarocchi deck. This is a Vacchetta style Tarocchi deck. Why do I recommend this for shadow work? Well, similar to Rider-Waite and Thoth, Vacchetta is a classic deck. There are many releases of Vacchetta decks. There's, I believe, Lo Scarabeo has done some mass market releases. The one I am using is I Naivi di Giovanni Vacchetta. So this is an Il Menegiello. This is a Il Menegiello edition, and it's, one of these really beautiful, printed on authentic matte cardstock with the, so this is not a budget-friendly deck, being Il Menegiello, especially, paying shipping to come from Italy to the United States. Not a budget-friendly deck, but there are other more budget-friendly mass market versions out there. And this is my all-time favorite Il Diavolo, the devil. This is my all-time favorite devil card. The devil's in the mouth of this beast, and he appears to be arguing with a snake. So just a fantastic devil card. And this is a very all-purpose deck. It's definitely not like, weighted toward doing shadow work by any means. It's similar to Rider-Waite in that it's an all-purpose deck. It's versatile. It's balanced between dark and light. It is very neutral. And I just love the historic imagery, and especially with this Il Menegiello release, I love the feeling of the matte cardstock. I guess in a way I would say it is more balanced toward light imagery than dark. But it's definitely, it's not a fluffy bunny deck. I'll say that. It is not a fluffy bunny deck. And I just love this deck. It's versatile. It will read on anything. And there are times, I don't know if it's particular to the shadow work, but there are times that I really want to feel a connection to Tarot's roots in the Renaissance and this Italian art. And reading with this deck just gives me this timeless, old-timey feel. and it works for anything, including shadow work. So for those of you who really like reading with these Italian Tarocchi decks, and you just want an all-purpose deck that also will work for shadow readings, this Vacchetta style tarot definitely will read any topic that you throw at it. And if you respond well to that Italian Tarocchi vibe, this is a great deck and I recommend it. Next up, in Marseille and Tarocchi style pip decks that are suited for shadow work, is the Triunfi della Luna Marseille style edition. This is also from Patrick Valenza and Deviant Moon. And I know I talked about this deck in my, in some of my other videos, but I love this deck. And let's get into it here. So I also have the Rider-Waite-Smith style version of this deck, which I shared in the Rider-Waite-Smith section of this very same video. However, I also really like pip decks. I use pip decks if I'm going to read with majors only, or if I want to use numerology. I find the pip decks really lend themselves to reading with numerology. I love this Hermit card. So with this Marseille style Triunfi della Luna, it does not have the expansion pack with all the different devil and tower cards, but you can see here it has two options for the strength card. This is the one that I use. I've shared how much I adore this card. It references the biblical myth of Samson and Delilah. And this death card references the Suicide King in a way. And I love this Temperance card. The Moon card in this deck is, interestingly enough, this is actually a somewhat benign sort of a moon card, even though the deck itself is definitely dark. And as we can see here, the Judgment card is actually borrowing the imagery from the Vacchetta Devil card. And then to have a look at some of the pips, they're lovely and very evocative of that old-timey historic feeling. So if I'm going to use a full deck with this, I might use this deck, for example, if I'm reading with a Game of the Hand spread, or if I'm reading with a French cross, tirage en croix spread, I might use this deck. And also if I want to look into numerology. Now, I don't always use numerology for shadow work type of readings. It would really depend, but there are moments when I would want to read with a numerology or astrological style, in which case this Triunfi della Luna Marseille style deck would be very suitable. And of course, just as it is with the Triunfi della Luna Rider-Waite-Smith style, this deck absolutely supports deep, deep emotional and spiritual work going into your inner demons and the dark side of your own emotions and personality. This deck will absolutely go there with you. So the final deck for these Tarot de Marseille and Tarocchi style historic decks for shadow work is Arlecchino's Augmented Arcana. And really, this is more of a honorable mention than an actual recommendation, because there are some issues reading with this deck, which I'll get into in a moment. But first of all, this is a indie deck. I bought it from the creator's website. So it's designed by Eve Lepkowski. And the website is stolentime.com. Hopefully you can see that. So I bought this. It is not mass market. As far as I know, you have to go to the creator's website to buy it. And it is Arlecchino's Augmented Arcana. And this Stolen Time website is a wonderful resource for Etea style tarot cards, and also for this old school Bolognese tarocchini. One of the decks this creator has released is, I believe it's one of those 64 card tarocchini deck. It's it's an abbreviated tarot deck. And this one is augmented. This is an 84 card deck. So in some ways, this deck is like a cross between a tarocchini deck and a Minchiati deck. The Minchiati is this Italian deck that had, I think, 96 cards. It was from Italy in the 1600s. And Minchiati is basically very similar to Tarot, except that in addition to the 78 Tarot cards, it also has cards for the virtues and the zodiac signs and the planets. So this is kind of a strange little deck here, because it's 84 cards. It's more than a Tarocchi, but less than a Minchiati. Anyway, so why do I recommend this deck for shadow work? Well, it's Arlecchino. So every card, the characters are masked. And obviously, shadow work is all about what's beneath the masks, whether it's your own mask or the masks of other people. Shadow work is almost always asking the question, what is beneath the mask? So here's the strength card. We see strength, la forza, with the pillar. So just in terms of this evoking this sort of Venetian carnival, masked type of vibe, which is really wonderful and evocative of the shadow to me. There was definitely some dark stuff going on in Renaissance Italy and Venice, a fascinating time, and this deck very much evokes it. However, when actually reading with this deck, if you are not an expert on this deck and tarocchini type of major arcana, there are no, this is the Lover's card. I know it's the Lover's card because I recognize the symbolism, but there's no number, there is no name on the card, and the figures being masked even makes it difficult to identify. Here we have the Moon card, and it shows historically, this is accurate, it's showing these astrologers are studying the moon, so, very old Italian motif for the Moon card. And it has just this beautiful color scheme and just fantastic artwork. So this is an honorable mention more than a recommendation. If you love the imagery of Renaissance Italy, and I actually have a very small collection of Italian Venetian style masks. So the fact that the people on this deck are wearing masks, I really enjoyed that. But as I said, it's quite difficult to read. There's no numbers, there's no labels. The majors are not going to be exactly what you're used to in a regular Marseille or Rider-Waite Smith. The majors are a little bit different. So this Let's show you some of the minors here, though, just so you can get a feel for some of the minors. So here we see, I believe that's the Page of Swords, King of Cups. And so we can see some of these minors are very much like the, Tarocchi Bolognese. Has this beautiful kind of organic color scheme that's based on the earth pigments that are available in France and Italy. So lovely, lovely deck if you really enjoy this Venetian mask type of, and if the Arlecchino, the Harlequin. If you enjoy that aspect of shadow work, and you're very much, that's part of your personal symbology, is this idea of the mask and the Harlequin, then this deck can be a wonderful deck. However, it is not at all beginner friendly. I'm an advanced reader, 46 years, and I struggle with reading this deck. So, honorable mention to Arlecchino's Augmented Arcana. Thank you so much for joining me on this top 10 deck recommendations for shadow work and dark topics. May you enjoy the blessings of good health, peace, prosperity, and wisdom, whatever deck you're using.